Michael, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me today. Something that really caught my attention whenever I was listening to the Unfinished podcast, or well, quick shout out to the guys from Unfinished podcast, was this idea of the black tax. So, for the listeners out there that may not know what it is that we're talking about, how could you explain what the black tax is?
Well, black tax is a term that was coined in South Africa, to be specific, but it has nothing to do with being black.
Mhm.
It has everything to do with the effects of remittances
Mhm.
and the actual phenomenon of remittances itself. Um, for those who don't know what remittance is, it's basically the sending of money by migrants from developed countries or developed economies, should I say, into their home countries. And the actual phenomenon itself of money or the flow of money from these migrants who are working worldwide, uh, some of the statistics that we'll go through just now are quite interesting when you look at the people who are sending monies across the world into their home countries and as to where they come from and what kind of jobs they do and how much they're sending. That all is eye-opening. And basically, this became an interest when I started chatting to some of my friends who share the same background as me. And I found out that all of us were basically getting money back. And yet we were silent about it. Nobody was really talking about this phenomenon openly. It was somehow a bit shameful at the same time, funnily enough. But it was a reality that all of us were facing, that a certain percentage of the monies that we earned in our jobs, in our businesses, and so forth, a certain portion of it was going back to where we came from. And it became interesting for me particularly, and also a friend of mine whom I work with closely on this project. It became interesting to track how much is it that people are sending, where are they sending it from, and how is the money being made from the countries, from the sending countries,
Mm.
and how is it being used by the receiving countries. And there's some interesting sort of uh, realities that we picked up on when we start following, sort of.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. I think obviously there's some commonalities with our cultures. Mexico has similar things, and I've seen it from personal experience with family, right? I'm trying to wonder. I mean, from what I listened from the last conversation, it sort of seems that it's kind of like a double-edged sword, right? So on one end, you are trying to help out your family, right? And of course, there's always cases where family are actually using the money in the proper way, but there's obviously other cases, right? I'm trying to wonder, whenever you decided to venture into creating a documentary about the black tax, what was it? What was the turning point that made you want to talk about this topic, given your experiences?
Well, it's interesting when you ask that question. The first thing that comes to mind is back in 2015, because I've been basically in this game of remittance since I was 18 years old, and back in 2015, I remember once I was just sitting at home, sort of sending money once more, and my partner just nudged me and said, "Hey, do you realize that you're spending money for the fifth time in 1 month?" And I didn't realize it because it was so emotionally driven. Like when you hear a story from back home about there not being enough transportation money for your brother to go to his interview, for your mother to take care of her health care, or the groceries are low. Every time there was a reason to spend money, I didn't question, sort of my family members and their reasoning behind their request for me to send money. But sending money to family and friends is so emotionally driven because you have these memories that are, a collective of your childhood, and you have this emotional tie, a very strong emotional bond and tie to these people you're sending money. So you hardly ever question when they ask. And it was only when I was nudged and it was pointed out that, hey, you're sending for the fifth time in a row. And I didn't believe it until I opened up my app and actually saw the remittance app that I was using at the time and saw the transactions that I had made for that month. And indeed, it was the fifth time in that month. And that was a wake up call for me. And that's when I started asking questions and I started wondering, if I'm doing this, is there anybody else who's in the same boat? And how, you know, how deep does the rabbit hole go? And uh, how much money is really floating out there in one direction or the other? And that's really what sparked the interest in the very beginning. So this has been brewing for a long time, and as I've met more people, as you said yourself, and as Renee also points out with time in the previous podcast that I was in, that they are also in the same boat.
Whenever I was looking into the topic and just sort of trying to remember my personal experiences, whether it was me sending money or at some point even receiving money from uncles that had moved to the US, it kind of seems to me that in certain families, or in certain cultures, it sort of starts off as some kind of tradition that the person who is able to make it, right, out of the country has this moral responsibility to sort of look out for the rest of the family, right? And then from one side, I remember, for example, I mean, I grew up in a very large family. I mean, I grew up with my uncles and aunts in Mexico, and we're talking about 10 people in one household. And, well, as a kid, you hear conversations that, such person has gone to the US and that they're sending money, but that is not enough. And sometimes you would hear conversations of being criticized of them because they're not sending enough money and sort of criticizing their lifestyle that they were having, sort of shaming them in a way that signaling like, hey, you're having such a good life over there, but you're not even thinking about us. We're over here, just eating beans and rice, tortillas, but, it's not fair. So it kind of seems to me that there's many different components of how this phenomena sort of manifests itself, because one, that sort of thing can sort of generate this victim mentality that I don't have to push myself farther because there's somebody that is looking out for us, right? Somebody that has the unasked responsibility to support a whole family, even though he's in a new country, perhaps building his own family, right? So is it something that has become sort of a tradition as well that you have seen in Africa, that the person who makes it sort of has this moral obligation to support the rest of the family?
Beyond Africa, you look at Asia,
Yeah.
you look at some parts of the Americas.
Yeah.
Um, you even see this happening in South America. It's worldwide.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's basically in all of the non-Western countries, all of them.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's why we decided to pick up on the subject, because too few people speak about it, and we need awareness on the topic. And going back to your questions about this phenomenon, if you look at how non-Western cultures behave, or how we brought up as a collective. We even have a saying in Africa that it takes a village to bring up a child, a single child. Um, and that's because of the close-knit uh, family structure that we have, where if you make a blunder out there playing with your friends, whatever it may be, this is back in my day. Now I know things have changed now, but you would get a spanking from your neighbor,
Yeah.
or from your neighbor 3 houses down the road, just to correct you on something that you've done wrong. Um, and this is the kind of culture that we come from. And in understanding remittance, I think it's the cost of success, as one may call it, is that once you move out of home, you still have that ingrained in you that you have to take care of your community that you come. And once you are identified as the one who has the ability to take care of your community, at least to a certain extent, you have to lift up your hand and you have to volunteer to do something about the poverty that you may possibly come from. And usually, especially now because of smartphones, that possible poverty that you might come from follows you wherever you go, because you constantly are in contact with your family and they have direct access to you. It's no longer back in the day where you have to write letters to each other and wait for 3 months to hear how badly they're doing. You hear it instantly these days. And that's something we don't think about, that we are faced with the reality of 5 to 2,000 kilometers away. We're faced with that reality instantly because of technology, and we can't run away from it as easily. And I was just looking at some statistics on my way coming here, and basically the transactions that are happening over the phone have reached half of the transactions that take place overall with remittances. Meaning that when people get a message immediately on their phone, they're sending the money almost immediately, instant, from their phone to their family members via these apps that are now available to send money. It's becoming less and less popular to send money through these places like Western Union, for example. You have to show up at a pay point and deposit actual physical money and so forth. And then going back to your point of pressure. Yes, there is pressure to also appease the neighbors, believe it or not. Because when your family is struggling, at least it's come from my mother, at least, and I know that it comes from other parents as well, where my mother has said to me, what will the neighbors say? You know, if we have to go begging for food from them, or we're running short of something that we are supposed to have technically, we need electricity, water, transportation money, healthcare, groceries, and all these things, and we need to have these uh, basic needs basically on a regular basis. There shouldn't be any shortage at any point in time, because once we experience a shortage, what will the neighbors say? So there's that phenomenon, and there's that pressure as well. And you, as a person living in the US or in the UK or wherever else it might be, away from home as a migrant working and earning in foreign currency, they constantly remind you as well. That's one of the things that has come up in my reality. Hey, we want to see the dollars. We want to see the euros. Show us the euros. Because they know of the exchange rate and they know how powerful the currency is. My mother doesn't understand the economy, basically, but she still understands the concept of a foreign currency and how powerful it is.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then something you touched on as well was this danger that comes with remittances. And that's basically making people complacent at home. People do actually abuse remittance monies quite often. I know it from personal experience. I've seen it from other friends of mine who send monies back home. You send money, and the next thing you see, boom, the statuses are buzzing online on the social media platforms.
Yeah.
Your family members are out there having the greatest time of their lives, drinking, having the greatest parties that you can possibly think of, while you are living a modest life, trying to afford them those privileges.
Yeah.
So you said it was a double-edged sword, and it is, because there are success stories. There are very good stories out there about remittances where people receive money back home and they start building amazing. So, for example, they would build outbuildings that they would then rent out, or they would start an Uber business where they would buy a vehicle and use that vehicle to generate even more money. So there are success stories out there. I just personally feel there aren't enough success stories, or we haven't explored them enough. I just hear mostly of these horror stories where people using the remittance monies that they receive.
What do you think that is, that there's not enough success stories? I mean, from your experience, what is it that you have seen that?
English, they have the saying, is easy come, easy go. Yeah. It's just the nature of the money. As I said before, because of how instant the requests can arrive to you, is as instant as the help arrives to them. Yeah. And that becomes an easy, like you become an ATM to some people who misuse the system. And when they receive the money as quickly as they requested, um, they then realize, oh, I've hit the jackpot here, and I can keep requesting. And they even learn. They even start learning when you have money, when you get paid. They'll find ways of asking on the first of the month, and they realize, oh, he always says no at the first of the month, but in the middle of the month, he always has something to give me. And they read between the lines, and then they figure out that, oh, this is the best time to ask for the money. And then it becomes a habit, and then it becomes a pattern. Yeah. And they also condition you, the sender, to expect to be sending the money at a certain time within in a month. And I think the abuse of these remittances is just based on how easy it is these days to get the money. And because of how easy it is, people take advantage of it. Yeah, no, they take it for granted, and it's inevitable that it would be abused.
Yeah, of course. And I think a lot of it sometimes, I've been thinking a lot about this, and like a correlation that I have seen sometimes is it kind of like, I think for many generations, depending on the person who moved to the first world country, depending on the type of job that he has or on the level of education, they're able to identify those things and understand that whether there is or there's not a problem, right? Like if I think back of my family, I think like a lot of my uncles that went to the US, they were mainly working construction jobs. So they didn't really understand the concept of money and hard work to some extent. What I mean by that is that I think until you start questioning those things and the behaviors that you are doing because you're trying to support your family in a different country, then you start thinking, okay, but if I'm doing this for myself, why can't they do that? Why can't they do that for themselves? I wonder if you have seen something in terms of on the stats that you have, if there's something that has to do with the educational level of the person that comes to these kinds of countries that is able to see and make better decisions with their money compared to someone that perhaps comes and does, I don't know, like a job that maybe doesn't require a high level of education.
Interesting you touch on the education part, because in my experience, from my observation, from my research, I found that the higher, the highly educated individuals are so much more careful about how their money moves away from their pockets. And they obviously earn much more, but even though they earn a lot more, they don't give as much from their earnings as you would have the less educated people. And that's for obvious reasons. Yeah. Um, and I find that this movement of money, depending on the individuals and their level of education, one of the stats that I looked at was India. India is number one in the whole world at sending money, remittances, from the UAE, the US, from the UK, all of those countries, mainly those countries combined. I think the number that we're looking at was $111 billion
Jesus. Per year.
that they're spending per year. And in most cases, these monies are exceeding the GDP.
That's what I was thinking. Small European country.
Yeah. And also, they exceed foreign aid by a whole lot. So we're talking about serious money that's moving across countries. In total, we're looking at, I think the last stats that I had a look at were 2023, 2024. $700 billion that have been transacted worldwide through remittances from sending countries to receiving countries.
That's a lot of money. I mean, when you're talking about one specific country, the amount of money that is going in, and what is it that's stopping those countries from further developing? I mean, you touched base on the beginning that it's important to see as well where the money is going and how it's being used. So if that amount of money is being injected into a country, into an economy, what's happening to that money?
Well, you're asking several questions. One of them is what's stopping the countries or what's stopping the individuals that come from these countries. For example, India. What's stopping them from developing India and developing within the country? Why is it that they have to move away? But if you look at that question, it's if we unpack that question, we have to obviously connect the dots and think about how did we end up here, and we then will have to look into colonialism.
Okay.
And the consequences of colonialism. I know that was it Trevor Noah, the comedian, who once in a very old piece of his on stage said, we didn't know about England until you came and told us about it. So I think that because of the historic events that have taken place, mainly due to colonialism and post-colonialism, we now have also improved in terms of transportation. Just the ability to get from one country to the next. We can just fly to places. Nobody has to take a boat and risk their life anymore and travel for 3 to 6 months just to get to the next nation. And for the ease of travel, the ease of communication as well, has lent itself to people finding out about these so-called first world countries. And the way that the economy is also structured. The economy is structured in such a way that the pound is so strong, for example, compared to other currencies. So is the dollar, so is the euro. And news travels
very fast.
And I'm sure you've seen that when a certain family member moves away, usually they start bringing other family members into the country where they've moved to, and that creates a community. And that grows exponentially. I also heard, was it several months ago, about 6 months ago, that for the first time ever in the UK, the ownership of homes by Indian migrants exceeds that of English people.
Like native English. Wow. So
that tells you a story. And if we trace back the story, you look at it, there is a form of it's like you look at it and you see the pattern there, and you see how it how it led to that point. So there's a lot of historic context if you want to understand the movement of people, the movement of money, and I think the other reality, unfortunately, we have to mention, there's a lot of corruption in developing countries. You look at a country like Venezuela, for example, was once thriving, was basically offering a lot of social services to their people, and with some bad management from the top, things have sort of escalated to what they are right now, and there's a lot of poverty there happening right now. Move over to Zimbabwe as well. Zimbabwe was once what was known as the red bastard of Africa. That's how much Zimbabwe was. That's how stable the country was, and that's how much it was respected. Education was at an astonishing level. Like, it was really high education levels of the citizens there. And they had more than enough food to go by because farming was thriving. The economy was great in the context of Africa. and with some bad management, bad leadership, the country went into a spiral. It went into a state of high inflation. You found, I think it was the first ever country, if I'm not mistaken, that had like $100 billion note, like
Like an actual
of
note.
an actual note. That's
Yeah.
how high inflation was, and that 100 billion couldn't even buy you a loaf of bread. You had to stack them up to be able to afford bread. The same kind of inflation was happening in Venezuela as well, probably bad as Zimbabwe. So just those two examples of bad leadership, and people run away from that, and they realize, hey, the place that I live in is beautiful. Like I come from a beautiful country, for example, a very beautiful country, or with beautiful people who are smiling, and the weather is amazing. But the reality on the ground is that, hey, if I want to make it financially,
I wonder how much of that sometimes can be in connection to the story that we tell to each other, like to yourself. You know, I also come from, Mexico, and a lot of the rhetoric sometimes in certain economic or in certain socioeconomic levels is, you know, we're never going to be able to thrive because the government's against us, the government's not working for us. And it kind of feels like you're laying down to die and somebody just has a foot on your neck. So I'm wondering how much of that is also present in Africa, that it's sort of being used as a crutch for you to not be able to push yourself. Because, and I mentioned that because, like, I heard a lot of that, growing up. Sometimes I had an uncle that would joke around, and because I grew up in a very bad and poor neighborhood with a lot of crime, and, he would joke around and would say, whenever you're going to grow up, you're going to be a thief, just like everybody else around here. So I think sadly, sometimes in those communities, people believe that story and end up in those kinds of environments, and they sort of get stuck and they just continue the same cycle generation of generation, right? But then every once in a while, there's somebody like you, somebody like me, that decides that, hey, I don't want this. I don't know what is out there. I don't know how I can get it, but at least I know I don't want this. So did you see in yourself also those kinds of things where you were perhaps, I mean, I don't know how it was where you grew up in. Obviously, it's a beautiful country, but I don't know how it was where you grew up, like the things that you were seeing. So did something spark in you that made you sort of say, okay, this is not what I want. I want something bigger. I'm going to go for it. How did that manifest for you?
my upbringing was extremely, extremely violent. We had gunshots outside my home on a regular basis. There were moments when, especially when it got dark, for us as young kids, it was fascinating to see the sparks of the bullets flying through the night in the dark. So I remember vividly that I used to walk out of my home, and when I heard the gunshots, I used to look over the horizon and see about 2 or 3 kilometers away from me, the gangsters shooting each other. And that became something fascinating as a kid to see, but I didn't know how damaging it was at the same time. Um, I've seen other horrific things that I probably wouldn't want to mention, but I've seen some horrible things, some violent things, and I come from a country as well that is very well known for its past system called apartheid, which means apartness, where people were divided by law. Yeah. Um, and that's why sometimes it's a bit questionable when someone says, do the things the legal way. Well, being apart was legal back then. Yeah. And doing things apart was legal. And being apart was based on race. It was so well sort of engineered and structured that they even broke apart a race. They created a race from a race, meaning that we in South Africa have a group of people called colored people. And colored people was completely invented from thin air when they wanted to provide an income even better than they were at that moment in time. So all the people that came, for example, as slaves to ships from, for example, Indonesia, and so forth. Mozambique. Those people who were ambiguous by looks, um, who were a bit light skinned, maybe had straighter hair than the normal African coarse sort of, nappy hair. Those people were then grouped into a class called colored people, and they then sort of defined their own identity and said, we are colored people. But then it didn't stop there. Those colored people were given slightly better rights than the indigenous African people. So they viewed themselves as better as well. But even though they viewed themselves as better people than the indigenous Africans, they weren't as good as the Caucasian or white people in South Africa. So there were these, there was this stratosphere, this layer, these layers rather of hierarchy depending on your skin color. And so I come from that kind of background. And I remember with seeing the apartheid police, for example, who were maintaining the system back then, just before it became a democracy. It was one of the most violent periods in our time because the different political parties that wanted power when we became a democracy were fighting for those positions, were fighting for that power. And I remember police dogs being sent out to not tear gas or pepper spray, as it's known in some parts. And I remember the barrel of a gun being pointed at me at the age of about 8 years old when all of this conflict was happening. And I thought the guy behind the gun would just pull the trigger and blow my head off because it was pointed right at my face. And hit yourself. I was 8 years old. And all of that was happening around me. Um, and I look back now as an adult and I think to myself, and that's trauma. Yeah. That creates a lot of trauma. And poverty in its nature is traumatic. And I think what we are running away from, if going back to your question about why don't we develop the places that we are already in, is that we are all just running away from the traumatic experiences that we have faced, and that we are facing, and that we might possibly continue to face if we don't make it big in some way or the other within that space that we're in. Because as you know, it's the 1% that makes it big. When you look at the statistics, even if you know nothing about numbers, you just look around you and you realize that the chances of you making are very slim. Yeah. And that entices so many people to move away from their immediate realities. It's just the traumatic experiences that we come from. That happens to be my traumatic experience, coupled with a whole lot of other anecdotes that I could give you and stories from my childhood. But that's just a few examples. Those are just a few examples that I could give of where I come from and what it looked like as a child. And so I get the opportunity to visit home on a regular basis. I visit home every year. So when I visit home, it takes just a ride through the city to see the homeless people in the streets to remind me of where I come from. Yeah. And to remind me why I left and why I'd like to be away for a little bit longer, just to recover from that trauma that I've experienced of poverty, of violence, and of hopelessness and just despair. And I think it's probably one of the top reasons I've picked up from my network as well of friends who share the same background as me, of why they've moved away. It's just really traumatic to.
Is it? I mean, now that that you've had the opportunity to visit other countries, other societies, for me, it has been sometimes a bit heartbreaking to sort of see how well certain societies function. To sort of think, like, damn, like if we just had a little bit of this back home, like things could be different. Do you find that as well? Sometimes.
For me, it's the small pleasures.
Yeah.
I had it again. It happened one more time, and it's still going to happen to me a few more times, and it just doesn't get old. But it's the simple act or the simple just this phenomenon of a bus or public transportation or a metro or train just being on time. You stand there, you wait, and as the minute crosses over to the to the expected time of arrival of transport you're waiting for, it arrives indeed on time. And that just gets me all the time. And I wish we had that back home.
Yeah.
Of course, the safety.
Yeah.
Um, and I still haven't pinned it down. Like, what makes it so safe here? Safer than where we come from? What makes it people so much more calmer?
Hmm.
Of course, you can look at the socioeconomic and sort of realities that you have here compared to back home, because you have such a strong social system
Yeah.
that people have a net to fall back on if things really are tough for them. So nobody has the incentive to go around robbing people,
Yeah.
because you can just go to what they have here as Kela, the
Yeah.
social system, and they'll give you a place to stay. They'll give you a little bit of money at the at the end of the month, uh, some form of allowance, if you like, or grant, and you can survive basically and have a roof over your head and have food in your stomach without doing anything.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's
in a
in a
way,
way
it's kind of
kind of
like
like
you have the possibility here to at least have a life worth living with some sort of dignity and not have to go to doing things that maybe you're not so proud of. Right. Yeah. That's always a very interesting one. And I mean, now, like we were talking earlier, I've been here for almost 5 years now, and a lot of things are just natural now. Right. I don't see those differences, but, my friends are visiting from Mexico, and something that they pointed out, obviously, the environment one grows up definitely influences your perception of the world and how you behave in life, how you move around the world. And something that she mentioned to me was that, like these kinds of shows in Mexico, they wouldn't be popular because people wouldn't just sit and watch. And because, well, as my daughter was getting ready to go to the kindergarten, she was watching her morning shows, right? And I think it was the Pikukakusen show. And part of that segment was they were teaching the kids how to wash their toys, right? And I mean, to me now it's very natural because I just see it every day, right? But to them, it was like, it's so interesting. Like, we kind of now get some little ideas as to what are those little elements that influence a society into the way that they are, right? It comes down to the kind of information that they're being exposed to, the kind of media that they're being exposed to that makes them that way. Right. And I think, of course, there's obviously a lot of factors that influence the way society behave, whether it may be self-inflicted or inflicted by outside forces, like in the examples of many African countries, colonialism, and that sort of thing. In Mexico, similar things as well. A lot of, obviously, American influence. But I wonder, how do you how do you try to improve your community based on the people that you surround yourself? Because I think it's impossible. It's quite hard to influence a big country, but I suppose you have the ability to influence those around you. What do you do to influence those around you?
that's a good question. I think leading by example will still outweigh so many different ways in which you can contribute to your society. Um, if I'm going to be talking about sending money back home and I'm not sending money myself back home, that's a contradiction. That's hypocrisy. And um, so it's just leading by example in every way possible, professionally and socially speaking. Um, if you're asking about my immediate environment, at least, and it's also the contributions that one makes home. Um, as I said to you before, some people decide to do great big things with monies that they receive uh, uh, in our home countries. Um, one of the things that I've attempted to do recently was also to bring over my sister to Finland, just to expose her, and I did bring her over to Finland. She just recently left and went back to South Africa, but she had never taken an aeroplane before, and she had never left the country before. She had never even left. Well, she had left the province at least at some point. I went to a different province, but for someone who's never flown to fly for the first time and use 3 aeroplanes and come across the world, thousands of kilometers, from South Africa to Finland, that was something else. And that was something that was my contribution towards her, and not only towards her, but towards the extended family, because whatever benefits her will benefit the rest of the family.
Yeah.
And I'm also hacking the system there, because if I benefit her in some way, the weight is not as much on my shoulders, because now we share the weight. So I was just trying to expose it to the world.
Yeah.
And to show her that, hey, you don't have to end up where you started. There are other possibilities. There's better out there. Have a look at where I am at, for example, in terms of just my immediate environment. Look at the small things. And one of the small things that I pointed out to her, once we were walking on the street of Tampere here in Finland, and I said to her, "Just listen." And she looked at me and she said, "What am I supposed to be hearing?" I said, "Look, nobody's hooting. Nobody's honking. This is how calm people are, and this is how calmly they drive." And that's something to pick up on. That's culture. That's something to absorb.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you compare it back to where you come from, that's where I come from. It's constant noise on the street. People just don't shut up. And I enjoy those small nuggets of just pleasure. And so, as far as your question is concerned of contribution and how I'm contributing, that's one way that I decided to contribute, at least recently, that was quite significant, is to take my sister on a journey that, figuratively and literally, where she just is wowed by everything that she comes across, to the point where she wants more from life than what she already has. And indeed, now that she's back in South Africa, she's bombarding me with messages trying to find out, how can I come back to Finland and contribute as well, to her own life, to my life, and the lives of those who are our extended family members and friends and so forth. So I see the ripple effect of my one action, for example, in this case. So those are some of the ways in which one can contribute, in improving one's own life and the lives of those around you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very true. I think a lot of it is just educating them, not just sending the money with anything with no attachments. I mean, something that I have seen, I have, family, and sometimes whenever you become the educated one, people come up to you, looking for advice or like asking you for, well, obviously money is one thing, but the other one is obviously like advice. And that can also be sometimes it can create some sort of pressure as well on you, right? Because you have already established your life in this country, right? You have your family, you have your job, you have things to worry about. But then obviously you don't want to turn your back on your family or on people who are looking for some sort of help. But there comes a point where those things don't get through. I mean, if it's going through, great. If they're creating something out of their life, then great. If they're pushing their own boundaries, then great. But there comes a point whenever you're just shouting into the air with no response at all. How do you manage those things?
It helps a lot, and I know you are fortunate if you have this situation in your life, but the people that you decide to spend your life with, whether it be a partner, or whether it be the friends and family that you have around you, as a support system, everybody needs to surround themselves with a tribe, your own tribe that you build. And those people are the people that keep you safe. And yes, there are moments when things don't go as planned with those people, where you have to sift them out and you have to pick and choose. And sometimes things go horribly wrong with certain friends who might betray you, or family members, or whatever the case might be. And then you have to just thin them down, to a point where you're only left with the highest quality possible group of people in your life. So, as far as I'm concerned, that's one thing that I have noticed in my personal journey
Mhm.
after living in Finland for 11 years is that you just have to be selective about the
Yeah.
people that you surround yourself with. Um, and also being deliberate and not just being blasé about life and just right. You know, some people say, let's go with the flow. And I always respond by saying, only dead fish go with the flow.
Well, that's a very good one. Yeah.
So, you know, sometimes being deliberate and sometimes a little bit of aggression, like being aggressively deliberate in what you do, who you spend time with. And it's not that easy to, sorry, it's not that difficult to find out who's good for you and who's not. Sometimes it's just the energy that you pick up from someone that gives you either the good vibes or not. Um, and sometimes it's the content that you pick up from someone. You sit
Yeah.
down with someone, you have a chat, and you realize this person is, sort of invigorates me, or this person gives me energy to do more with my life, with your sort of circumstances and whatnot. This person inspires me, and I like spending more time with this person. And if you get that sign, if you get that vibe, then you go with it and you stick with that person. And sadly, sometimes you end up only with a couple of people in your life because of being deliberate and sort of selective
Yeah.
about who you want in your life. But how I cope with it is exactly that. I'm just very selective with who I spend my time with, and it helped also to move cities. Now that I live in a new city for the past 2.5, 3 years or so, I've had the opportunity to start from scratch, if you like.
Yeah.
And I'm a bit older now, and I'm hopefully a bit more wiser. So I'm more careful about how the process of finding people in my life that I want to surround myself with.
That's very good. Going back a little bit on the concept of black tax, I wonder how much, I mean, from the conversations that you have had with people about this topic and in the film that you have been working with, do you find that sometimes people's motives to send money back to their family also give them a sense of meaning, and that perhaps stopping that would sort of hijack their identity that they have adopted as being the provider of the family?
Well, it's pretty simple. You lose a lot of respect back home if you stop sending money. If you stop supporting your family in whatever way, you lose a lot of respect when you make a return back home, whether it's yearly or every 5 years or whatever the case might be. Um, it's in our case as men, it's a part of our masculinity as well.
Yeah.
For women, it's part of their nurturing
Mm.
character as natural nurturers. So whether you're a man or a woman, you have a strong cause to be sending help back home. Yes, we call it money, but at the end of the day, it's a lifeline.
Yeah.
And I also learned something when I arrived in Finland, is that we have a lot of people who've never been hungry ever in their lives before, who don't know what starvation feels like, what we call hunger pains. Um, you can't describe that to someone. Someone has to experience that. And someone, or many people rather, living in a place like Finland or Norway or whatever the case might be, will never know hunger pains in their entire life.
Oh, it's crazy.
And when you know hunger pains and that the hunger pains are associated with memories, sitting around with your family members and not having anything to eat with them, just one message or one phone call that says, "Oh, we're experiencing that old friend of yours that that you no longer know, no longer friends with, that you're no longer sort of." And when you get those messages and those kind of calls, it goes back to that emotional tie thing that I was speaking about before. That your strong connection to your family and the collective suffering that you've experienced with them takes you back to that moment when you experience hunger pains yourself and you give emotionally more than anything. It's a lifeline.
Yeah.
And I've realized in my personal life that I've saved my family from walking out of the door from our home and begging from our neighbors many a time.
Mhm.
When I get those messages and they send me pictures to show that everything is empty in the kitchen, and then you know, there's no question about it. I will send the money immediately to help them out in that situation and to ensure that they don't shame me and they don't shame themselves
Mhm.
by going to the neighbors and asking for help. Uh, and again, this whole documentary about black tax and this uh, effort at bringing awareness to people about it, it stems from these kind of stories, basically, that people are just not aware of. When you see someone, I often see, particularly in winter, when I see the Walt guy doing their thing and the Fedora guys and these food delivery guys, and I'm like cycling in minus 20 degrees from one address to the next and doing that for 8 hours in minus 20 degrees, having come from a tropical country or coming from some beautiful warm country, and you come to a place like this and you're doing that kind of job and you're getting, what is it, 3 to 5 euros per delivery, and you have to accumulate those few euros over a period of 8 hours multiplied by 20 to 30 days in a month. Some guys don't rest; they
Yeah.
just keep at it.
Day every day.
And I look at that experience and I do the math and I'm like, when by the time you give 100 or 200 euros, it's X amount of your time that you've spent on the road, or even more than that if you decide to give more.
And even you're suffering during that period.
Exactly, you're giving off yourself in such a way that family members back home sometimes don't realize the pain that we go through to be able to afford them the pleasures that they experience as a result of our pain.
Yeah, I think it's obviously quite evident. I think most people that have some sort of connection with their world country know what hunger is like. Maybe they have experienced it, maybe they have seen it, maybe because they have traveled to their world country and that they have an idea what that is. But what is something that you hope people from those third world countries would understand about what we go through here in those kind of countries, trying to create a life?
I guess that's one of the example that I just gave is one of the things that I want to highlight in the documentary that we're making. I want to show the pain that we go through in order to accumulate the few euros that we then have at the end of the month to then take a portion of that and give to them. I think the amount of respect and honor and just acknowledgement will definitely be at a different level than what it is right now, because I have noticed that many people come from developing countries or emerging economies that receive remittances are under the impression that we sit and make money the way that you and I are talking right now. That it's comfortable, that it's soft, that it's gentle living, and that it's easy.
Mm.
Make the money that we send, and one of the misconception is tied into how easy it is to receive the money.
Yeah.
And that gives the wrong impression that it was also easy to make the money.
Yeah.
So I really would love to open up the process, the entire life cycle of how the money is produced, to how it's sent, all the platforms that we're using to send the remittances, to the point where it's received on the other side of the world, and how the money is used on the other side. It's not going to be easy to document all of those things, of course, because nobody wants to exposing themselves misusing the funds that they just
Yeah, of
received.
course.
But I'd love to find people who would want to be interviewed using the money honest, like in the way that they would have used it had they not been shown on camera.
Yeah.
If they were gonna party the money away, I would love to see that reality and see someone going out there and just blowing it all on some fancy bottles of champagne or in one night
Yeah.
at their local, sort of club or something like that. And I'd also like to see the success stories where someone actually takes the money and decides to buy a vehicle to do Uber or Bolt or whatever they call
Fix
these
the house.
e-hailing, fix the house and
Yeah.
rent out some spaces in the house. I'd love to see those stories in their spectrums, in their colorful spectrums, and in the differing weights uh, of significance. And yeah, that's the motivation behind going into a subject like so-called black, and also just highlighting that black tax is not only experienced by black people.
No.
It's a worldwide phenomenon, and it just happens to be the term that was given to it.
Yeah.
That it's called black tax. Um, I know of Russians, for example,
Yeah.
who are experiencing the same thing. Um, so it's a lifeline we give to our family and friends out there. And by the way, friends also benefit from it.
Oh yeah.
It's not only family. Um, friends will slide into your DMs and be like, hey, I've got this business proposal for you. Would you like to invest in this or the other? And or they've come up with some story that, they're struggling with one situation or the other.
It happens in so many ways, and sometimes not even like outside of the country. Like it also happens inside of the country itself. If there's a family member that happens to make it inside the country, is the one to go to, right? I wonder. So for the documentary itself, are you also a character in the documentary?
Self, no. But the guy that I work with on the documentary, Kingsley Iffy, he has decided to be a character himself in the documentary. And we were looking for more characters to feature in the documentary. Well, we're spoiled for choice. There's so many people out there who are experiencing this, so we're trying to be as selective as possible as to who we get, someone who has some interesting twist or angle or hook that we can work with, that has an interesting story to tell, some great anecdotes, and maybe someone who can also show us the entire life cycle that we want to see, and not someone who's only going to give us a portion of what we're looking for, but someone who really has the ability to give us some facts and figures from their state of giving and how much they're giving and how often they give and what the money is used for, and if they can show us from the other side as well, the money is received, how it's been used. We're looking for those kind of characters in the documentary.
I wonder, from before you started the project, you obviously had this idea of the way you wanted to make it. And as you have worked on it, has the outcome been different to what you thought it would be? Has there been some learned lessons that you never saw coming?
Backlash.
Yeah.
Big time. Backlash from the people who are recipients of black tax. They don't like it when they are spoken of as beggars. That's how they feel. I'm not the first person, I have to say, I'm not the first person to document something based on black tax. BBC has once featured a South African girl who also went into the subject, but they did a short clip about black tax that lasted about 4 minutes or just under 4 minutes. And I contacted her at some point when I decided to do this documentary. And she said to me, be ready for it. You're going to get a lot of backlash from people who are recipients of the black tax, because they feel that, for some people, receiving these monies is a secret. Some people are wondering back home, how are you making it day to day? You're surviving, you're eating, you're healthy, you have transportation money, you're going to the healthcare facilities, you have groceries. how are you making it? And they just keep quiet and they don't want to share that they have a sponsor somewhere out there who's sponsoring their lifestyle. And there's a sense of shame and there's a sense of secrecy as well. So uh, the other thing that came about was that bringing up this topic also shakes it shakes up the people who are the senders of these monies, because they feel, oh, uh, there are some uncomfortable realities that I have to face as the sender, like I did when I sent 5 times in 1 month. And someone had to remind me that, hey, I think you're sending a bit too aggressively here. From what you make and what you're sending, it's not making sense. You're giving too much away from what you're earning back to your family, and you're having almost nothing left for yourself. So some of the people who are senders, when they get their wake up call, they realize, hey, I think I'm giving too much. Or should I stop giving so that my family and friends start making their own way out of poverty? Because I have to admit that I did experience a phenomenon where my siblings didn't want to do anything for themselves anymore. They knew for a fact that they will get groceries for that particular month, and that there will be electricity, there'll be running water, and there'll be all the basic needs will be provided by me. And that just created a scenario where, when you call your mom and your mom is complaining about everything back home, and snitching on everybody and telling you exactly what they're doing. And I would get the whole uh, sort of lowdown on what's happening back home. And I realized from what my mother was telling me that, hey, thank you for the help that you're giving us, but I have to let you know that your brother is not interested, your sister is not interested in uplifting themselves and finding work, even though they're in their late 20s, early 30s. Where they should be at their peak in terms of professionalism and their professional lives and working lives. And that is probably one of the biggest challenges that is associated with helping, is when you're helped. I come from an agricultural background. I studied winemaking, and uh, in in the wine world, in Afrikaans, which is a Dutch derivative language in South Africa, they say, hoe slechter die grond, hoe beter die wijn. And that means the worse the soil is, the better the wine. And how that relates to this phenomenon is that in agricultural terms, when the soil has too much organic material on the surface, meaning manure or sort of fertilizer and so forth, and when you feed it too well, the soil, the roots become lazy and they don't dig deep enough to get all of the soil profiles that are available for them to be exposed to, because the taste of the wine is also influenced by all the different soil profiles that you get, which differ from layer to layer the deeper you go into the ground. So you do yourself and the wine that you're going to produce a disfavor when you fertilize the soil too much, because the roots become lazy. And the other thing that happens is that the vine becomes so weak that when a strong wind blows, the vineyard just collapses and it blows over, because the roots are not
Wow.
deep to anchor the vineyard. And that hit hard when I learned that back in uni, when our lecturer just decided to share that little sort of line of "Slechter grond, hoe beter de wijn." The worse the soil is, the better the wine. And the same, when conditions are not as favorable, you panic a bit and you find a way to improve your immediate conditions. But when you're receiving more help than is needed, that creates a sense of laziness, and it creates a sense of apathy and despondency from people who should be actively involved in the economy. And I learned that the hard way. So I have moments where when I give, I now test the vigor and the aggression in which I'm giving. I assess it regularly now, and I always ask myself the question. I look at my transactions and I see how many times I'm giving a month, and how much I'm giving, and I'm also getting reports of how the money is being used. Um, it's a bit challenging sometimes with as parents get older, they lose their sense of how money should be used.
Yeah.
In South Africa, for example, we have something called stokvel. A stokvel is basically a potluck club, like where you every month pour in money into one pool, and that money in bulk goes to one person.
Okay. Yeah.
And keeps shifting every month to a member of the club, and we call that a stokvel. And my mother has joined this kind of stokvel thing. And I'm afraid, for example, as I sit here with you now, I'm afraid she's being manipulated and used because she's not that young anymore. Yeah. And she just keeps giving, but she hasn't had her turn where the money has arrived in her, or in her as physical money. She hasn't had her turn in a year now, but she keeps giving every month, and she keeps being assured that you'll get your turn, So you get these kind of reports as well, and this is what makes helping difficult. Yeah, and we want to tell these stories, and we want to share these anecdotes with people who have no idea what black tax is. People who didn't even know about this underworld, this underbelly of transactions moving from one place to the next, to the point where it amassed to $700 billion. So it's and the funny thing is that uh, remittances didn't slow down during COVID. Instead, they went up because people were complaining more. They were more in trouble, and those who could whatever they could together from their respective countries, and they were sending more during COVID, and that just goes to show you how dependent people are. That when everything falls apart, um, these sending parties play a huge role in the economies of the receiving countries.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is a very crazy thing how it develops and how it continues to grow exponentially. Now, for any listener out there that might be in a similar situation where they're sending money and perhaps they are putting themselves in a difficult position with themselves or with their family, what piece of advice would you give them?
Biggest piece of advice: you cannot give what you don't have. If you yourself working in whatever country, whether it's the UAE or the US or UK or Europe, you find yourself working or earning. By the way, I have to tell you, before I continue on that thought, there are people who are refugee seekers that I know of who receive 350 euros a month to survive on, and they're still giving money home from that 350 that they receive. And they're expected to give some of that money, whether it's 50 euros or 100, but they're expected to give some of that grant money that they receive back home as well. That's how deep this thing goes. But you cannot give what you don't have. And that goes beyond physical money itself. It's your sanity as well. I don't think that you can sustain this level of giving of your working hours, of your labor, of your strength, your physical strength, your intellect, of your everything, be able to earn whatever it is you might be earning per month or per year. You cannot give of yourself so much, uh, and what are you left at the end of the day? Because for many of us, we are the only lifeline our family has. So I think that taking stock, as I said before, how aggressive you're giving is very important. Giving within your means. They always talk about spending within your means. When you spend on yourself, whether it, be going to a bar or shopping for clothing or whatever the case might be, But this falls within that. Like you have to sponsor your family within your means. And I think if you're earning, for example, X amount of money and giving half of it to your family, that's a way too much. And I don't think that you can have a quality lifestyle if you're barely surviving just to keep your family back home afloat. It's important for your family to also know, at least to a certain extent, that you yourself have needs, that you yourself have expenses, that you yourself in the current country that you may be in are faced with higher costs than they are. One of the things that my sister didn't understand, for example, was just the simple math behind buying a loaf of bread. What I do is I convert it for her, and I tell her that, look, buying this loaf of bread costs 50 rand, and I tell her in our local currency, and that hits home.
It's like, holy shit, it's expensive.
And then they realize how expensive it is when buying bread back home costs only 20 rand, and I'm paying 50 rand here. And then when they hear those figures, they're like perplexed, and I'm telling them that taking a trip that is only 2 kilometers by bus cost me 60 rand, and she can't believe it, because back home that only costs 15 to 20 rand again. So when I convert it to a language that they understand, it is when it makes more sense how much sacrifice I have to make for them to live the lifestyles that they lead back home. So my advice is just to the people who are faced with this phenomenon, and I know that there are many coming from different backgrounds, is that look after yourself first, because if your family loses you and loses your ability to create wealth and to create a living for yourself, they then nobody to fall back on.
Mm-hmm.
So looking after yourself first as the giver or the sender of remittances or monies back home, looking after yourself is of the utmost importance, to the point where I think that once you earn your salary per month, for example, it's important to give something to yourself, as a reward for your hard work for that particular month.
In order to
To just be able to be encouraged and stay encouraged, to keep going in whatever respective job you might be doing, business you might be running, because it's a harsh world out there. And if you don't give to yourself, who else will?
Mm.
And I think that self-love is the most important thing, to be able to sustain this lifestyle or this expectation that we have, that our families have on us.
Yeah. Michael, is there something that we didn't touch base that you feel it's important that people should know?
Well, I think we've covered significantly a whole lot about this black tax phenomenon. There's nothing that comes to mind that I can think of right now that we haven't really spoken about.
Cool. Michael, this has been, listening to you in the previous one, you got into the topic a bit, but I think we managed to go a little deeper this time, and I really appreciate your insights. I think the way you put it, because perhaps you have a little bit more experience to it, can definitely help the listeners or anybody who might be in either situation, whether you're the receiving or whether you are the one sending. I think it's important to sort of share this message to people, because I think, there's definitely not a lot of content being put out there in terms of what people are going through in these kinds of countries, trying to, well, first make a living for themselves and to support their family, because the reality as well is that whenever you decide to move to a new country, it's not just moving to a new country and then life is going to be great. I mean, there's this lonely period where you don't know anybody, you're away from your country, you're away from your tongue, you're away from your traditions. You're sort of stuck in this middle place where you don't look like them, you don't speak like them, but yet you're expected to fit into society. So there's so many elements that perhaps a lot of people don't realize what we go through when we decide to take a decision like this to better ourselves and also to better the outcomes of our families. So I think it's definitely very important for people to get a good sense of how it is also on the other side. That, well, it's not as shiny as it may seem. Yeah.
I think one of the things in closing that I'd like to mention is that, there's exactly the opposite phenomenon happening in developed countries and compared to developed countries.
Mm.
Developed countries like the one we're in right now, being Finland, it's a lot of the times that parents are helping out their kids to the point where their kids are adults.
Yeah.
To the point where their kids are living in apartments that are paid for by their parents.
Yeah.
And to the point where the parents are waiting for their kids to start earning. And even then, I know of scenarios where people who are grown adults who are earning money are still receiving monies from their parents. So it's completely the opposite phenomenon.
Yeah.
Whereas if we move out of home, the first job that you get as a student, you have to give back to your parents, and it doesn't stop until they're gone from this world. You give until the end, basically. So I think that as well with people who are married, for example, to Finns, who are giving back home, it's also very important for the Finns to find out more about this phenomenon, because many of those mixed families, mixed heritage families, in cases where the local Finns might not understand this phenomenon, it just opens up a whole lot more about the fact that your partner is not the only one doing this.
Yeah.
It's a wider phenomenon that's taking place, and it's rooted in a lot of complex history, and that history has developed into the present time that we have. And understanding that entire life cycle helps you make peace with the reality of having to be a sender of these funds to family members and friends back home. So a lot of Finns are also affected directly by this.
Yeah. And I think they don't, because it's in a way somewhat new to a certain extent. I don't think they're very aware of the ramifications in the long term. Especially, I mean, the fact of the matter is that you didn't do any good to that particular person in the long run, because there's going to be a day that the well's going to dry out, and what is that person going to do? Right? What they say, teach a man how to fish. No, what is it? Give a man a fish. You feed him for one day, teach him how to fish, you feed him for the rest of his life. Right. Yeah. Michael, has been an absolute pleasure talking with you today. I think we could go on for hours and hours and hours. We didn't get a chance to go into your wine history, but I think we can do that perhaps somewhere down the road with a new episode. I really appreciate you, man. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, then. Bye, everybody.